I was adding the last name to my guest list when my mother's text slid onto the screen. Your sister's wedding is the family's priority. We can't make it to yours. No apology. No, I'm sorry, honey. Not even a weak excuse. Just a single line that felt like a door quietly locking from the other side. I stared at it long enough for the words to blur, for the blinking cursor on my guest list to turn into a heartbeat I could hear in my ears. I typed 2 words I didn't mean. That's fine. And closed my laptop like I was closing a chapter I'd never wanted to write. A week later, while my parents were zipping up Chloe's dress and straightening centerpieces at a Boston hotel, the world found out something they'd never cared enough to ask about. My wedding had already started. Under olive trees, at my $6 million villa in Tuscany, with the people who actually chose me. And when the photos began to spread, the lanterns, the long table, my grandmother's raised olive branch, the silence from home finally told the truth they'd spent my whole life trying not to say out loud. People think family pain starts with one big event, the fight, the betrayal, the moment everything broke. It doesn't. It starts with things so small you almost feel crazy for noticing. In pictures, for example. From the outside, my childhood looked perfect. We were that family, matching Christmas sweaters, holiday cards with scripted fonts, a golden retriever who showed up in more photos than I did. Our smiles were wide, our clothes coordinated, our house always just tidy enough to look like we had our lives together. But if you looked closely at those photos, you'd start to see it. Every birthday, Chloe blowing out candles. Every vacation, Chloe in the middle of the frame, arms spread. Every achievement, Chloe, front and center, confetti somewhere in the air. And me, I was the elbow at the edge of the frame. The blurred face in the background. The sister who was there, but not really in the picture. Chloe was the orbit. I was the gravity no one noticed. She danced. Mom clapped like she'd discovered fire. She won trophies. Dad rearranged the living room shelf to make space. When I brought home straight A's, the reaction was different. Nice job, honey, they'd say, already turning back to Chloe's practice schedule or Chloe's costume fittings or Chloe's big opportunity. Mom had a phrase for it. You're lucky, Esther. Things just come easier for you. Lucky. As if every late night studying, every extra credit project, every quiet victory was just an accident. As if my effort didn't count because it didn't sparkle loudly enough. There's a photo album in my parents' living room that explains everything better than I ever could. Page after page of Chloe's life. Chloe in a tutu. Chloe in a princess dress. Chloe at the beach, at prom, at Halloween, at graduation. If you flipped fast, you might not even see me at all. But I remember one photo. I was 16. It was after one of Chloe's performances. I'd given up my Saturday to help her get ready, done her eyeliner, fixed a tear in her costume, held her shoes while Mom fussed with her hair. After the show, someone suggested a picture of the girls. I remember standing next to Chloe. I remember the flash. I remember Mom saying, "Beautiful, that one's going in the album." Weeks later, I found the photo. Except I didn't. What I found was Chloe, alone in the frame, and a sharp, clean edge of glossy paper where I should have been. Mom had physically cut me out of the picture. When I asked, trying to sound casual, "Where's the rest of it?" She didn't even look up from the kitchen counter. "Oh, that one looked better, centered on Chloe," she said. It was just composition. Don't be sensitive. Composition. As if I were a crooked line, messing up her symmetry. I didn't cry. I shoved the question, and the sting, and the shame, down so deep, I almost convinced myself it didn't matter. But something in me learned, that day, that my presence was optional, that I was editable. Only 2 people in my family ever noticed the pattern. Grandma Helen, who watched everything with quiet, sharp eyes, and my cousin Rachel, who never once forgot my birthday, even when my own parents did. At dinners, Grandma would slide an extra roll onto my plate and lean in. Some people only see what's shiny, she'd whisper. That doesn't mean the quiet things aren't valuable. I didn't know it then, but she was planting something inside me, a seed of truth I'd need years later when everything finally snapped. Favoritism doesn't explode overnight. It seeps into the little things until the smaller child doesn't bother asking for more. Until the older one learns to bend, to understand, to accommodate. By the time we were adults, neglect was our family's native language. When Chloe forgot my college graduation, simple misunderstanding, Mom said. When Chloe borrowed money and never paid it back, she's still finding her way, Dad answered. And when I moved across the country, built a career, started a company from scratch. Esther's independent, they'd tell people, like it was convenient. Like my independence excused their absence. So when Mom's text about my wedding came through, your sister's wedding is the family's priority. We can't make it to yours. I wasn't surprised. I was just done. There in the quiet hum of my apartment, fridge buzzing, candle burning low, invitations stacked on the counter with their neat gold wax seals, I felt something shift. All my life I'd been the child who bent, so others could be comfortable. The daughter who adjusted, excused, minimized, understood. That night, for the first time, I didn't bend. And in the space where my apology would have normally gone, a thought appeared. What if I stopped begging for a seat at their table and build my own? 2 days after the text, my phone lit up again. Chloe. Her name flashed on the screen, with a photo of us from years ago. Her in the center, me at the side, cropped by the edge of the frame, but still technically there. I almost let it ring out. Almost. I answered on the last ring. Esther, she squealed, sugar already dripping from her tone. Guess what? My stomach tightened. My body had learned, long before my mind did, that her guess what never ended well for me. What? I asked. The venue we wanted just opened up for our wedding. She barely took a breath before adding, it's the same weekend as yours, but that's okay, right? You're on the West Coast, we're in Boston. It's destiny, destiny. She said it like it was romantic, like the universe itself had chosen her over me, and I was supposed to clap. I didn't answer right away. I just listened to the clink of her bracelets through the receiver, to her breathing, to the faint noise of what sounded like Mom in the background. You still there? Chloe asked, a hint of impatience slipping through the sweetness. Yeah, I said. My voice came out steady. That surprised me. That's great, Chloe. Really. Perfect timing. She giggled. I knew you'd understand. You've always been so reasonable. Reasonable. Another one of my assigned roles. The strong one. The mature one. The emotional shock absorber of the family. For a second, I almost stepped back into it, almost said, of course, whatever you need, like I had 100 times before. But there was a line now where there hadn't been one before. My wedding. And for once in my life, I didn't step over it. We hung up with her still floating on excitement, and me staring at the wall like something important had just happened in a room where nothing had moved. The next evening, Mom called. Sweetheart, she started, voice soft and heavy with that tone she used when she was about to ask me to sacrifice something. I wanted to talk about the dates. I already knew. Chloe's fiancé's family can only do that weekend, she continued. She's very emotional right now, and it would mean so much if you could be flexible. Flexible, reasonable, strong, independent. All those words they loved to pin on me like medals that made their neglect sound like a compliment. So, you want me to move my wedding? I asked. I didn't raise my voice. That unnerved her more than yelling ever could have. There was a pause. Then, we just think it would be easier for everyone. You're so independent, Esther. You'll understand. There it was again, the assumption that my feelings were adjustable, that my joy could be rescheduled like a dentist appointment, that my life was the flexible one so Chloe's could stay fixed. Mom, I said slowly, you promised you'd be there. She sighed, long and theatrical. don't make this about sides. It's just logistics. That word cut deeper than she realized. Logistics was my world. I'd built an entire company around precision, timing, fairness. Around the idea that moving one thing affects everything else, so you handle it with respect. In my industry, logistics meant integrity. In my family's dictionary, it meant we made a choice that hurts you but don't want to call it that. That night, I called my dad. He picked up on the second ring. Izzy, he said, using the nickname he fell back on when he wanted me to stay small. Your mother told me. You know how your sister gets. If we don't go, she'll take it personally. You've always been the strong one. So it's my job to understand, I asked. Again, silence. The kind that isn't empty, the kind that's full of all the things someone chooses not to say. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. Then I sat in the dark for a long time. The only sounds were the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock over the stove, each second landing like a question. The ring on my finger caught a fragment of lamplight and threw it onto the wall in small, fractured pieces. It was beautiful and broken at the same time. That's when it clicked. My family wasn't cruel in loud, cinematic ways. No slammed doors, no dramatic disownments, no screaming matches in the driveway. Their weapon was omission. Not showing up, not asking, cropping, forgetting, excusing. They had taught me to interpret silence as love, to hear you're independent and translate it as, we don't have to try with you. Not anymore. I opened my laptop. Not to move my wedding date, not to cancel deposits, but to open a tab I'd saved months earlier. Something I'd once called a fantasy, a maybe someday idea. A stone villa in Tuscany, olive trees, terracotta walls, sunlight that looked warm even through a screen. I zoomed in on the courtyard. I could already see it. The long table, the lanterns, the vines overhead. A wedding, not built around who was supposed to be there, but who actually chose to show up. If my family didn't want a seat at my table, fine. I would build a table they could never take credit for. That click, the sound of me confirming the booking, was the loudest no I had ever said. And I didn't say it to them. I said it for me. The next morning, I booked a flight to Italy. No dramatic announcement in the family group chat. No angry call. No last-minute plea. Just a quiet decision, paid for with my own money from a life I'd built while they were busy watching someone else. The plane descended over Tuscany, under a sky the color of soft linen. Even from the window, the hills didn't look real. They looked painted, layered in shades of green and gold, stitched with rows of cypress trees and old stone farmhouses. I picked up my rental car, small and slightly dented, and followed the directions through winding roads that seemed too beautiful to be practical. At every turn, another view stretched out. Vineyards, distant villages, the kind of light that made everything look like a memory, even while you were still inside it. When I finally pulled up to the villa, my breath caught. The pictures hadn't lied. If anything, they'd failed to capture it. Stone walls the color of honey, wooden shutters faded by years of sun. Bougainvillea creeping up one side like a slow red fire, and beyond it all, olive trees, silvery and soft, rolling down the hill as far as I could see. An older man stepped out from the side door, wiping his hands on a cloth. Signorina Esther, he asked, his accent wrapping around my name like a new language was trying it on. Yes, I said. He smiled and held out a ring of keys. I am Rossi, this place. He looked back at the villa, then at me. Waits for someone who sees it. Something in my chest shifted at his choice of words. I had spent my whole life around people who looked through me. Now I was standing in front of something that had been waiting to be seen. Inside, the villa smelled like stone and lemon and a little bit of dust. Like a place with a past, but not a prison. Old beams crossed the ceiling. The floors were cool under my shoes. The rooms were simple, but every window framed a piece of the landscape like a painting. I walked from room to room, touching surfaces, opening shutters, letting light spill in. I could see it. Tables here, flowers there, chairs lined up beneath that arch, candles along this wall. It wasn't just a building. It was a blank page. For the first time, my life felt like something I could rewrite, not just endure. I threw myself into the work. During the days, I met with local craftsmen, carpenters with sawdust on their hands and eyes that crinkled when they smiled, a florist who talked to her flowers like they were unruly children, a lighting guy who showed me lanterns and bulbs and ways to make night look like a secret. We repaired shutters, sanded tables, strung wires, chose fabrics. The sound of hammers and tools mixed with the buzz of cicadas outside. Italian phrases floated through open windows. I only understood half the words, but all the warmth. In the evenings, when the workers left and the world grew softer, I sat on the terrace with a notebook, sketching. One long stone table under a canopy of vines, lanterns hanging above like captured stars, clay plates, linen napkins, olive branches down the center. No family table, no designated parent's seat, no hierarchy. Just one table, stretching long enough for everyone who chose to show up. The locals started calling me La Señora Silenciosa, the quiet lady. I didn't mind. For once, my silence wasn't a wound. It was a strategy. I wasn't shrinking. I was building. At night, I'd call my fiancé Miles. He listened as I told him about the villa, about Rossi, about the olive trees. "So you're really moving the wedding," he said one night. He didn't sound shocked. More proud. "Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm more than okay," I said. And I realized I meant it. This feels like the first decision I've ever made that didn't involve guessing how they'd react. He was quiet for a second. "Then I'm in," he said simply. "Where you have peace, I'll meet you there. No guilt, no conditions, just presence." And it struck me how different that felt from my parents' version of love. All strings and expectations and silent scorekeeping. One evening, as the sun melted into the hills and turned everything gold, I stood in the courtyard and tried to imagine it on the day. The chairs, the music, the faces. For a moment, a familiar ache rose up. The old picture of my mom in the front row, my dad adjusting his tie, my sister pretending we were closer than we were for the sake of the camera. Then I let the image go. In its place, other faces came. Grandma, Rachel, the cousins who'd always sent messages on my milestones even when my parents hadn't said a word. I realized something important that night. I hadn't come here to punish my family. I'd come here to find my own. The next week, I sat at a long wooden table in the villa's kitchen, envelopes spread out like a deck of cards. The invitations this time were different from the ones I'd mailed months before. Those had been formal, embossed, heavy, gold-edged, designed to look impressive on someone's fridge. They belonged to the version of me who still believed her parents' approval was the highest honor. These were simpler. Off-white cardstock. No foil, no flourish. Just clean black ink and a pressed olive leaf tucked inside each one. A small promise that if you came, you'd be part of something real. I didn't send one to my parents. Not out of spite. Out of honesty. They had already told me where their priority was. I was just choosing to believe them the first time. The first invitation I addressed was to Rachel. She'd always shown up for me, with texts, with calls, with little pockets of care that had kept me afloat more times than she knew. The second was for Grandma. My hand shook a little as I wrote her name. She had spent years trying to soften the edges of my parents' choices without ever fully standing against them. This time, I wondered which way she would lean. I sent a handful of others, cousins, 2 close friends, people who had proven themselves in quiet ways. No obligation invites, no networking seats. No, we have to include them or it'll look bad. Days later, my phone buzzed with a video call from Rachel. She didn't bother with hello. "I heard what happened," she said, eyes blazing. Your mom's been telling everyone Chloe's wedding is the main event that weekend. Like yours is a rehearsal dinner. We're done with that crap. Send us the details. We're coming to Italy. I laughed, the sound bubbling up unexpectedly. What about the flights, the cost? I asked automatically, still half in the mindset where caring about me was an inconvenience. We'll make it work, she said. You've spent years adjusting so they didn't have to. Let someone adjust for you for once. A few hours later, a text from Grandma arrived. My dear girl, I have missed enough real love in my life. I will be in Tuscany. Send me the date and the dress code. Love, Grandma H. I read it 3 times, tears finally breaking past the control I'd held onto for so long. They started a group chat without me at first, then added me in once it was chaos. Screenshots of booked flights, links to little Airbnbs nearby, jokes about learning Italian phrases beyond gelato and ciao. They named the chat The Real Family Table. I stared at that group name longer than I'd stared at my mother's text. For the first time in a very, very long time, I didn't feel left out. I felt chosen. Somewhere between the smell of plaster drying and the rustle of olive leaves outside, I understood something. This wasn't a revenge story. It was a revelation. I wasn't exposing my parents. They were revealing themselves. All I was doing was building a table in the open and watching who walked toward it and who chose to stay away. The morning of both weddings arrived under the same sun. 2 ceremonies, 2 sisters. 2 worlds that had finally stopped pretending to orbit each other. In Boston, the air was thick and nervous, the kind of humidity that clings to your skin and refuses to let go. My parents paced the hotel hallway in lavender and charcoal gray, trying to hide the way their eyes kept flicking toward the door. Every so often, Mom whispered, maybe the flights are delayed. Then, maybe the GPS sent them to the wrong venue. Then, quieter, maybe they forgot what time to arrive. But no one had forgotten anything. People simply didn't show. Seats that were supposed to be filled by cousins sat empty in neat, humiliating rows. The front row chair, meant for Grandma, remained untouched. A lavender program resting on it like a ghost of intention. Chloe stood in front of the mirror in her bridal suite, adjusting her veil again and again until her manicured fingers trembled. She kept glancing at her phone. When the bridesmaid announced, "Still no word from Grandma," Chloe's smile cracked like a plate dropped on tile. Maybe she overslept, one bridesmaid offered gently, but even she didn't believe that. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the same morning sun poured down in soft gold over my villa's courtyard. Tuscany didn't know it was the same day. The olive trees didn't care. The hills just breathed quietly under a blue sky, as if they had been waiting for years to witness something honest. I stood inside the villa, the cool air brushing my shoulders as I looked out at the courtyard. Lanterns hung above the long stone table, swaying gently. Wildflowers lined the center. Clay plates and hand-woven napkins sat ready at each seat. When I stepped forward onto the terrace, the breeze lifted the veil from my hair as if the wind itself was blessing me. The first person to stand wasn't my mother. It wasn't my father. It was Grandma. Her eyes brightened like she had known me my entire life. Not the cropped version of me, not the edited version, but the whole uncut girl who had always been there, waiting to be seen. "There she is," she whispered. My throat tightened. I walked down the aisle to the sound of Eli's guitar, each note threading through the air like a memory being rewritten. Rachel was wiping her eyes before I even reached the front. Her kids tossed olive leaves instead of petals, laughing as the breeze carried them wildly away. Every seat was filled, not by obligation, not by guilt, but by choice. When the officiant spoke, his Italian accent softened each word. Love is not measured by how many are invited, but by who shows up. My vows came easily, not because I had memorized them, but because I had lived them. To the ones who show up, I said, looking at the faces glowing in the Tuscan light. This love is for you. For those who saw me when it wasn't convenient. For those who stayed. For those who believed. Grandma pressed a hand to her heart. Rachel let a sob escape. Miles looked at me like I had just created a world he wanted to live in. We kissed under the olive tree, the leaves whispering above us like they were sharing an ancient blessing. And somewhere across the world, in a ballroom filled with empty chairs, my absence finally made a sound loud enough for my family to hear. Dinner in Tuscany tasted like home should taste. Warm, generous, full of laughter that rose into the violet sky, like fireworks no one needed to photograph to remember. Lucia brought out platters of handmade pasta, roasted vegetables, bread still warm from her stone oven. Candles flickered along the table. People passed dishes, clinked glasses, reached for each other's hands. Halfway through dessert, Rachel slid into the seat next to me, phone held tight in her hand. You might want to see this, she whispered. Online, the first photos from our wedding were already circulating. The lanterns glowing above us. The table stretching beneath the vines. The entire courtyard lit like the inside of a heart, finally opening. One picture, the one that spread fastest, showed Grandma raising her olive branch in the air, laughing the way she used to before years had dimmed her joy. Her olive branch became a quiet symbol, a declaration, a truth. Those images traveled faster than I expected. Within hours, they had reached Boston. Chloe was posing for her formal portraits, bouquet trembling slightly in her grip, when one bridesmaid gasped. Wait, isn't that your family? They're in Italy. Chloe grabbed the phone so fast she smudged her makeup. Her eyes widened at the photo of me and Miles standing beneath the Tuscan sky. Grandma is there, she whispered, voice strangled. And Rachel, too. All of them. The photographer slowly lowered his camera. Guests murmured. Someone in the back whispered. I thought they said they couldn't travel this weekend. Mom's face turned stiff, pale, unreadable. Dad's mouth fell open. It's Esther's wedding, he said quietly. For the first time in her life, Chloe looked small in the center of a room. The officiant raised a glass for the toast he had rehearsed. Something about family unity, about traditions, about togetherness. Nobody lifted their drinks. Back in Tuscany, laughter rose, soft and warm. Music drifted under the grape canopy. People danced barefoot on stone. Grandma pulled me into her arms and whispered, This is what family was meant to look like. And for the first time, I believed her. The days after the weddings passed softly in Tuscany. The lanterns came down. The laughter faded into yesterday. But the warmth stayed, clinging to the stone walls, tucked between the vines. A long table, once full of life, now held only dried petals and the faint stain of wine. Beautiful leftovers of a night that had rewritten something in me. One morning, as I folded linens on the terrace, my phone rang. Mom. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But Grandma's words echoed. Answer. Not for then, for yourself. I pressed accept. Her voice was sharp with humiliation. Esther, she snapped. Do you have any idea how embarrassed we were? Everyone at Chloe's wedding was talking about your little event in Italy. You made us look heartless. The truth makes people look like what they are, I said quietly. She took a shaky breath. You're being cruel. We were trying to keep the peace. Before I could respond, another voice echoed through the receiver. Steady, firm, utterly done with the excuses. Judy, Grandma said, you spent years asking this girl to shrink herself so Chloe could shine. She finally stood tall. And you call it cruelty. No, that's freedom. Silence. Then the call disconnected. Peace washed over me like warm sun on stone. That evening I walked to the long table and placed one olive green ribbon on the chair at the head. the chair that had always been empty in my life. For the girl who used to wait to be chosen, I whispered. The wind stirred the vines above me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt free. As the sun dipped behind the hills, turning Tuscany to molten gold, I poured a final glass of wine and sat at the table I had built, not from wood, but from truth. Grandma's words floated back to me. Love isn't management. It's showing up. She was right. I spent years believing my worth was something I needed to prove. That if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, bent enough, someone would finally look up and say, yes, you belong. But belonging doesn't work like that. Some people never see you, not because you're invisible, but because their eyes are only trained to admire what shines loudly. And quiet people like me, we shine differently. I used to think walking away meant losing. Now I know it means choosing myself. My villa still stands on the hill above the olive groves. The table is still there, polished, waiting. Not for the people who decided I wasn't worth the trip, but for the ones who show up without being asked. The ones who see what's real, not what's convenient. The ones who choose you before you earn it. Because family isn't blood. Family is presence. And sometimes the quietest act of love is closing the door on the people who never knocked.